Waves crash soft on untouched sand, a rhythm written by nature's hand. Ocean whispers secrets deep and true. Here's a life that's waiting for you. Zinoha calls.
Okay, so we've got this really fascinating stack of material here. We're talking articles, research papers, notes, all pointing to something pretty significant happening along India's Konkan coast. Specifically, the real estate market in Sindhudurg seems to be undergoing a transformation, and not just a small one.
No, that's right. When you really dig into these sources, you see a region that, historically was all about agriculture, fisheries, maybe some mining, and now it's fundamentally shifting. It's a pretty dynamic story, actually. Economic forces, government policy, lifestyle changes, all kind of colliding.
And our mission today, diving into all this material, is basically to cut through the noise. We want to understand the core reasons, the catalysts driving this rapid change in Sindhudurg's property scene.
Yeah, figure out what the market actually looks like on the ground right now.
Exactly. And weigh up the opportunities against some very real, important risks. And trust us, as we go through this, there are some surprising forces at play here.
So maybe let's start by just setting the scene a bit. The sources make it really clear this isn't just like accidental growth. There's a conscious, strategic push happening to move beyond those traditional economic pillars.
Yeah.
So what does that diversification actually look like, according to the documents?
Well, it's really about building resilience, isn't it? Bringing in new types of economic activity. The sources highlight things like the proposed Adali Pharma Hub. And interestingly, it's specifically designed for non-polluting industries.
Which is smart, kind of acknowledges the region's environmental beauty right off the bat.
Totally. And you also see things like the MSME Technology Center, which is there to support local small and medium businesses in areas like engineering, food processing, that kind of thing.
And leveraging existing strengths, too, like the One District, One Product focus on processed cashews. It's all about creating a more varied economic base, one that can actually support different kinds of growth down the line.
And woven into that, almost inseparable when you look at the real estate impact, is tourism.
Ah, yes. Tourism.
Sindhudurg was actually declared a tourism district way back in 1997, apparently.
Yeah.
But you really get the sense from these documents that the momentum is building now, like significantly.
Absolutely. And the potential is just huge. You've got this incredible natural canvas, the historical sites, stunning beaches, those famous forts like Sindhudurg, Vijaydurg. Loads of potential for adventure sports, too.
Right.
And what's really clear from the sources is the government isn't just, hoping tourism grows. They're actively pouring energy and policy into it.
We're talking specific policies.
Yeah, things like the Maharashtra Tourism Policy 2024, Swadesh Darshan 2.0, these big framework initiatives.
And they're planning concrete projects, too, which
Wow.
always gets attention. I saw mentions of an INS killer artificial reef, an underwater museum, even a submersible vessel project.
Exactly. That level of planned strategic investment, it acts as a signal. It attracts private capital. And where does that private capital often flow?
Into hotels, resorts, infrastructure, property development to support all those visitors and potentially new residents, too.
Precisely. And you can see that starting to filter into the broader economic health of the district as well, right?
Yeah.
The sources point to some pretty robust economic growth indicators.
They do. Things like GDP and NDP, basically measures of the district's total economic output, show a consistent upward trend. They specifically highlight a strong surge between 2020-21 and 2021-22.
Okay.
That kind of fundamental economic health, it just underpins investment confidence across the board, doesn't it?
It really does. So you've got economic diversification and a serious government push on tourism, creating fertile ground. But if we look at all these sources together, there's one single factor that emerges again and again, almost shouting from the pages as the most impactful catalyst for real estate specifically.
Let me guess. Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. This is the real game changer, the pivot point for the property market here. Access transforms everything. Perception, potential.
Right.
The sources are absolutely unequivocal, dramatically improving how people and goods can get to and move within Sindhudurg is fundamentally rewriting its story for investors, for potential residents, for everyone.
And leading that charge, maybe the biggest single trigger point highlighted in these documents, is airport development. Now, yes, there's the local Sindhudurg Airport Cheapy that's been operational since late 2021, improved domestic connections. But that's not the main event, is it?
No, Chupi gave a good local boost, definitely. But the real narrative driver, the one everyone's talking about in these papers, is the new Manohar International Airport Amopi, just over the border in Goa.
And surprisingly close to parts of Sindhudurg, isn't it? The sources said something like only 14 kilometers from that Adali industrial area we mentioned earlier.
Just 14 kilometers. That proximity is absolutely crucial. And the sources actually try to quantify the impact of Amopi opening. They directly link it to a really substantial property price jump, 25 to 40% in the nearby areas of Sindhudurg.
Whoa, hang on. A 25 to 40% jump just because an airport opened nearby? That's incredible.
It is. It basically put the district on the map overnight for a whole new category of buyers.
Yeah.
And it firmly established it as a viable, easily accessible second home market.
Right.
It's leveraging Mopo's connectivity, obviously, but also anticipating that spillover demand from Mopo's own surrounding commercial plans. You know, things like the Aerocity, that airport city concept with hotels, resorts, convention centers.
That really hammers home how a major piece of infrastructure can instantly revalue a location. It changes the whole calculation of distance, convenience,
Right.
connects it to Mumbai, Pune, even international points.
It just opens up entirely new possibilities for who can realistically live there or visit or invest.
And it's not just air travel getting this massive boost. Road connectivity is also undergoing a huge transformation. The Konkan Expressway, the Mumbai-Goa Coastal Highway.
Yes, this is projected to be largely complete by June 2025, and the sources describe it as another absolute game changer. It's set to drastically slash travel time between Mumbai and Goa, potentially down to, 6 to 8 hours?
Which is a huge difference from what it used to be.
Massive. But perhaps even more importantly for Sindhudurg property values, this isn't just a bypass route. The new 6-lane highway is described as a major development corridor running right through the district, connecting towns and villages along its path.
So it's not just about speeding past Sindhudurg, but actually opening up areas within it, making them more accessible.
Precisely. The documents anticipate significant land value appreciation all along in this corridor, particularly near the planned interchanges. Places like Kankavli, Kudal, and Sawantwadi are highlighted repeatedly as key nodes that will benefit.
Okay.
Plus, you've got the upgrade of the existing NH66, improving north-south access as well.
And then being a coastal district, there's the maritime aspect too. Port development is part of this bigger multimodal picture.
Yeah, the sources mention expansion at Reddy Port and the development of a new greenfield port at Vengurla. That signals an increased focus on maritime trade potential.
Right.
And for personal travel and maybe local transport, there's also mention of a planned roll-on, roll-off ferry service ro-ro connecting Mumbai directly to Malvan.
A ro-ro ferry service to Malvan. That's actually a really interesting addition to the mix. Creates another option.
It just adds another layer of accessibility, doesn't it? For people, for vehicles. Contributes to the overall picture of dramatically enhanced connectivity.
So, okay. Between the airports, especially OBA, the major new highway, improved ports, even ferry services, it's clear this isn't just like incremental improvement. It feels more like a full-scale connectivity revolution for the district.
That's a good way to put it.
And the sources make a really compelling case that this connectivity revolution is the primary force driving the revaluation of real estate here, making it genuinely feasible, genuinely attractive for people who might be based much further afield.
So let's pivot then. Let's talk about what the real estate market itself looks like on the ground today based on these sources. We know prices are appreciating significantly. We've seen the AMO-pay effect, but the market is also described as quite fragmented. What does that actually mean for someone looking at properties there?
Well, fragmentation basically means that the impact of these big drivers, the airport, the highway, isn't uniform across the entire district. Prices can vary quite a bit, not just between the larger areas, the talukas, but even within relatively small micro-markets, little pockets.
Okay, so that suggests that while the big headline infrastructure story is key, you really need to look at very local factors too.
Exactly. How close is this specific plot to a particular beach? What are the unique natural features right there? Is it near one of those emerging development hubs like Adali? And critically, what are the specific environmental zoning rules for that particular piece of land?
Right. All those things can create very different dynamics from one spot to the next, even if they're relatively close geographically.
So a buyer really needs to do their homework on the ground. Can't just look at the macro trends. Is the market purely driven by, the hope of prices going up? Or are people actually using these properties? Is there a rental market to speak of?
Actually, the rental market is described as quite strong and definitely on an upswing. The sources noted a really attractive average rental yield figure, around 7.2%.
7.2%. Wow. In the current wider market, that's a pretty solid yield.
It is, and it seems to be fueled by a couple of things. Obviously, the growing tourism sector is a big part of it, but also, increasingly, by this workation trend. People using coastal properties as remote work bases for longer stretches.
Ah, interesting. So it offers income potential alongside the home for capital appreciation.
Seems so.
What kinds of properties are seeing the most demand, according to what we have here?
Well, the highest demand seems to be for land parcels, which is pretty typical in developing areas, right? People want to build their own custom homes or maybe just hold the land for future value.
Makes sense.
But there's also strong interest noted in low-rise properties and villa units.
And increasingly, the sources also mention the emergence of these larger integrated townships.
Yes, these sort of gated communities offering a whole package, villas, maybe farmhouses, service apartments, providing a bundled lifestyle experience rather than just a standalone house.
That touches on what buyers are looking for. Is it just a standard list of amenities, pool, gym, whatever? Or is it something more?
The sources really emphasize a desire for a lifestyle experience, often like a resort-style living feel.
Yeah.
Buyers seem to want proximity to the key attractions. The beaches, yes, but also those new airports, the emerging leisure hubs. It feels less about just owning a house and more about accessing a certain way of life, a certain environment.
Yeah, that definitely aligns with the whole workation or second home idea.
Mm-hmm.
So who exactly are these buyers being drawn to Sindhudurg right now? It sounds like quite a mix.
It is quite a diverse mix, which makes the market dynamics pretty interesting. You've got non-resident Indians, NRIs. They're looking at it for investment returns, maybe stability, perhaps a future retirement spot.
Okay, that's a classic driver for Indian real estate, definitely.
Then you have a significant chunk of urban investors, particularly from places like Mumbai and Pune. They're looking for second homes, weekend getaways, maybe alternatives to their own saturated and, frankly, expensive markets.
Right.
And this group includes those lifestyle buyers we just talked about, people using flexible work arrangements to spend longer periods there.
Makes total sense. The new highway, the improved flight connectivity,
Yeah.
it makes those weekend trips or longer stays so much more viable than before.
Exactly. Then you also have retirees mentioned, drawn by the tranquility, the perceived lower cost of living compared to the big cities.
Okay.
Holiday home seekers who are maybe blending personal use with trying to get some rental income. And then, driven by the local economic development we discussed, parts of the local population looking for upgraded housing options themselves.
Right, locals benefiting from the growth.
And finally, of course, developers and pure investors who are focused squarely on capital appreciation, those rental yields, maybe exploring niche concepts like ecotourism resorts or wellness centers.
Wow. That is a really diverse range of motivations. It tells you a lot about the multifaceted appeal of the region right now, doesn't it?
It really does.
So, given all this activity and interest from different groups, are there specific zones within Sindhudurg that the sources highlight as particularly promising, investment hotspots? Where's the action concentrated?
Yes, the sources do pinpoint a few key areas. The NPA Airport Influence Zone is right at the top, especially areas like Dodamarg and Swantwadi, simply due to that direct proximity.
Proximity pays, basically.
Seems like it. Proximity to major connectivity is a clear driver here.
And the Konkan Expressway corridor, I imagine, gets a mention too.
Absolutely. Towns and villages that are set to benefit from those planned interchanges, Kankavli, Kudal, Swantwadi again, are expected to see significant activity. Infrastructure access is just a really strong predictor of land value appreciation in these scenarios.
But it's not only about the shiny new infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
The established tourism areas still feature prominently.
Oh, yes, definitely. The existing established tourism appeal keeps areas along the coastal belt places like Malvan, Vengurla, Devgad as relevant hotspots. They maintain their draw.
Okay.
And finally, areas linked to that planned industrial growth, like Adali Village and Kudal, are flagged as sort of emerging zones to keep an eye on.
Got it. So for someone interested in this market, maybe thinking about investing or buying, beyond just looking at property listings and prices,
Right.
what are the crucial broader indicators the sources suggest keeping an eye on? What should you track?
Right. Beyond the typical property metrics, sales velocity, localized yields, asking versus selling prices, the sources recommend tracking a few other things, like the actual progress of those big infrastructure projects. Are they hitting their completion targets?
Yeah, delivery is key.
Monitor tourism metrics, actual visitor footfall numbers. Look at job creation figures coming out of the new industrial initiatives, and generally keep an eye on the broader economic health indicators for the district GDP growth, per capita income trends.
So the fundamental health of the local economy underpinning the property market.
Precisely. They also mentioned tracking regulatory adherence or projects following the rules, and even changes in local income levels as relevant indicators for the market's long-term sustainability.
You mentioned regulation earlier, and the sources really seem to emphasize Sindhudurg's sensitive ecology and the significant environmental regulations in place. How does that layer into the real estate development story here? It sounds critical.
It's absolutely critical, and the sources stress it's basically non-negotiable. The region's stunning natural beauty isn't just nice to have, it's its core asset, its main appeal.
Right.
But that means development isn't a free-for-all. These strict environmental regulations are a major consideration. They add complexity, and they definitely influence what can be built and way it can be built.
What are the main specific regulations mentioned in the sources that say a prospective developer or even a buyer needs to be most aware of?
Okay, the main ones that come up are the Coastal Regulation Zone Norms, CRZ, which apply along the extensive coastline. These dictate things like how far back from the high tide line you have to build, height limits, density rules, all near the sea.
Right, standard coastal rules, but likely applied quite rigorously here given the focus on preservation.
Exactly. Although the sources did highlight one interesting recent change. Apparently, local authorities have been empowered to give clearance for smaller residential constructions within CRZ area.
Oh, that is a notable nuance.
Yeah.
Does that suggest maybe a potential streamlining for individual homes or smaller local projects compared to the big developments?
That seems to be the implication of reading between the lines in the sources, yeah. It could be aimed at simplifying approvals for locals building homes or maybe small tourism units while keeping the larger commercial projects under a more centralized, rigorous review process, to protect the delicate coastal ecosystem.
Okay, that makes a certain kind of sense. What else besides CRZ?
Well, parts of the district fall under the Ecologically Sensitive Area, or ESA, designation. This is tied to the Western Ghats.
The Western Ghats designation, of course, big implications.
Huge. This designation restricts, or in some cases even prohibits entirely, certain activities, like new mining operations or large-scale construction projects that could significantly impact biodiversity.
And you can see the direct influence of this, can't you, in the types of industries being encouraged that focus on non-polluting industries, like certain pharma sectors in the Adali Hub. That feels like a direct response to these environmental sensitivity.
Absolutely. And then for any significant project, there's the Mandatory Environmental Impact Assessment, or EIA.
The EIA, that formal study required for larger projects to really understand and mitigate their potential impact on the environment before they get the green light.
Exactly. And the sources point out that navigating all these layers of regulations, CRZ, ESA, EIA, it definitely adds complexity. It can extend project timelines, impact costs. You need expertise, you need patience.
So these regulations are clearly hurdles. They add complexity, maybe limit the amount of easily developable land in some areas, but do the sources also suggest there's a positive side to them, an upside?
Oh, absolutely. While they definitely add challenges for developers, they are fundamentally pushing for more sustainable, more eco-conscious development.
Which aligns with what many buyers are looking for.
Precisely. For the buyers drawn to Sindhudurg because of its natural beauty, its tranquility, those people seeking that resort-style living rooted in nature, preserving that environment isn't really a constraint. It's actually core to the long-term appeal.
True. You don't want the development itself to destroy the very reason you came there.
Exactly right. So by ensuring development respects the ecology, these regulations can actually enhance the long-term value and desirability of properties in the region. It aligns the growth with the very natural assets that make Sindhudurg attractive in the first place.
So, the takeaway is that rigorous due diligence isn't just about checking the property title. It's also critically about understanding the environmental status of the land and figuring out the path to getting all the necessary clearances.
It's absolutely paramount. The sources strongly recommend rigorous due diligence on land titles, yes, but also confirming the CRZ and ESA status and verifying all required environmental clearances before making any investment or starting development. It's a step that could completely change the viability of a project.
Okay, so we've sort of unpacked the big picture transformation of Sindhudurg, driven by connectivity, strategic investment, the market dynamics, those diverse buyers, and this crucial environmental context. Now let's look at how these forces are manifesting in actual projects on the ground. The sources include a section on something called Zinoha, described as a series of experiential living societies. This sounds like a prime example of the kind of lifestyle-focused development those buyers we discussed might be seeking.
It really does. The sources position Zenoha as kind of embodying this trend towards a very specific type of living experience. They call them experiential living societies, yeah, or sometimes just gated communities. And the core mission, stated right there in the material, is promoting blissful and experiential living.
Blissful and experiential living. That's quite evocative language. And the sources even get specific about the target audience, don't they? Saying they are individuals who value their lives more than livelihoods.
That phrasing really jumps out, doesn't it? Value their lives more than livelihoods. It suggests a conscious choice, a pivot away from purely financial metrics of success towards, well, quality of life.
Like an escape from the urban grind, maybe. Reconnecting with nature, seeking something they call pure living.
Exactly. That's the picture being painted in these documents.
And how do they propose to achieve that? Is there a specific formula or approach mentioned?
They actually break it down into 3 core pillars: wellness, farming, and habitat.
Wellness, farming, and habitat.
Okay.
That feels very holistic.
Yeah, it's presented as the place where conscious living meets serenity, a sanctuary for the senses, a way to flow with the rhythm of life. These 3 pillars are designed to work together. They're the foundation of the whole resident experience.
Okay, so what is this focus on intentional living, nature, community? Where is this project actually located, according to the sources? Location seems pretty critical for this kind of vision.
It's in the Sindhudurg district, specifically near a place called Eckerberg. They describe it as being nestled along the Konkan coast, just north of Goa, and positioned on the cusp of South Maharashtra and North Goa.
On the cusp. That phrasing highlights its strategic position, doesn't it? Near the Goa border, potentially leveraging Goa's connectivity while still offering something distinct. How is Sindhudurg itself portrayed by the project material? What's the pitch for the location?
They paint a very appealing picture: a coastal paradise, unspoiled beaches, lush landscapes, vibrant local culture, a serene ambiance. They explicitly set it up as a peaceful alternative to the potentially busier, more commercialized parts of Goa.
So the positioning is leveraging Sindhudurg's tranquility against Goa's maybe higher energy levels.
Yeah, while still being close enough to benefit from Goa's infrastructure, like MOPA. They mention the Maharashtra government's designation of Sindhudurg as a tourism destination, and they summarize the region basically as an untouched paradise where nature, heritage, and opportunity meet. So beautiful for living, but also, they argue, full of investment potential.
And they back up that opportunity argument by listing specific nearby attractions and, crucially, those big developments we talked about. They're not presenting it as some isolated retreat.
Not at all. They'll list everything from natural spots like Tsunami Island, Polygot Waterfalls, the Talari Conservation Reserve, to cultural points like Malvani cuisine and Sindhudurg Fort, existing infrastructure like the Konkan Railway Line, and then, crucially, those major upcoming projects.
Like Mopi Airport, right? That massive Euro 2,600 crore investment explicitly linked to driving tourism and development across the region.
Exactly. And they connect it directly to the planned Aerocity nearby, that huge 232-acre commercial development planned around the airport. Plus, they point to new IT parks emerging in North Goa as a potential source of spillover demand for housing or second homes in Sindhudurg.
So the growth narrative isn't just tied to local tourism initiatives, but also to the broader economic development happening in the wider region, which Sindhudurg is now much better connected to.
That seems to be the core argument, yes. They also mention luxury resorts opening nearby Sindhudurg Portico, a Taj property supposedly just 20 minutes away, and that Euro 55 crore joint investment by Nashik and Sindhudurg specifically for tourism infrastructure. And of course, the huge Konkan Expressway gets prime billing.
Yes, that 26,000 crore, nearly 500-kilometer Mumbai-Goa superhighway, explicitly called a game changer in their materials too.
They also cite things like new flights, Pune to Goa, Pune to Sindhudurg boosting accessibility, and the Tata Group's big 5-star tour center project planned on 54 hectares. And they even throw in a bit of social proof, mentioning Sachin Tendulkar celebrated his 50th birthday at a farm stay in the area.
Huh. Okay, so the pitch is basically, it's a serene paradise, yes, but look at all this high-profile investment, all this new infrastructure, even celebrity attention, all proving its growth potential. What's the ultimate takeaway from these sources about Sindhudurg's potential then? How do they wrap it up?
They wrap it up pretty strongly, calling it a vivid confluence of nature, luxury, and unrivaled investment possibilities. The message is clear. They see significant long-term value potential here, driven largely by that improved connectivity, particularly the road networks. They even explicitly frame their analysis as decoding Sindhudurg's real estate transformation and present the region as an emerging hotspot.
Okay, it's a compelling narrative they're building. So what does that lifestyle within one of these Zinoha communities actually look like based on the details provided? What's the intended daily experience for a resident?
It's a very curated picture they paint. They describe waking up to birdsong, being surrounded by greenery and calm, maybe starting the day with yoga or some Ayurvedic care, interacting with the seasonal farms on the property, joining community activities. It's positioned as this very conscious way of living, deeply integrated with the natural environment and the community around you.
And they list a lot of specific amenities to support this vision across those three pillars: wellness, farming, and habitat. Let's start with wellness. What's included there?
Wellness is clearly central to the concept. They detail a dedicated restorative wellness zone, things like yoga pavilions, magnesium pools.
Magnesium pools, that's quite specific.
Yeah, and Ayush-certified Ayurvedic therapies, special dark and soundproof rooms designed for sensory rest, centralized music therapy, copper-based earthing.
Copper-based earthing. Okay, we're going beyond the standard spa offering here.
Definitely seems like it. Specific meditation and yoga spaces, Shinrin-yoku, that Japanese concept of forest, bathing foot reflexology, pebble paths, and a dedicated wellness center run by experts. It's presented as a very comprehensive, very holistic approach to well-being.
And for the farming and nature pillar, what's the focus there?
The emphasis seems to be on integrating with and preserving the natural environment. They talk about permaculture gardens, sustainable food systems designed to mimic natural ecosystems, aquaponics, creating water bodies, planting orchards, using native species, practicing regenerative agriculture.
Okay.
And on the more practical eco-friendly side, using activated charcoal filters for water, having composting zones, recycling programs, a really big focus on water conservation and rainwater harvesting.
So the operational aspects of the community are designed to be sustainable too.
That's the claim, yes. And the habitat itself, the buildings are described using terms like eco-conscious architecture, sustainable materials designed to blend into the landscape, and they even detail eco-friendly transport within the community. Shared electric vehicles available at the clubhouse, specifically mentioning a ratio of 1 EV for every 15 plots.
Huh. That level of detail suggests some practical thinking behind the sustainability claims, perhaps.
It does lend it a bit more weight.
And community, the third pillar. Is it just about people living near each other, or is there structured interaction planned?
It sounds very structured. They mention having an amphitheater, dedicated community spaces for celebrations, storytelling, cultural exchange, resident committees, cultural ambassadors, open lawns for gathering, a community clubhouse for events, leisure, connection. The stated goal is actively fostering interaction and building meaningful connections.
And community gardens, where residents can actually participate in organic farming and share the produce. That ties back into the wellness farm habitat idea. Plus, I saw mention of this unique Gurukul space developed with an organization called Era Vindam for experiencing Indian classical arts, like dance, music, martial arts.
Yeah, that adds another layer, doesn't it? A cultural and educational community engagement aspect. The sources really stress this idea of building meaningful connections and shared growth within the community.
Okay, how about practicalities? Things residents would need day to day.
They do mention having secure, gated staff quarters, providing comfort and security for the staff working there. On-site sports services are detailed, and residents apparently have the option to build their own house using sustainable elements. Interestingly, the sources state that houses are available at a nominal cost. Nominal cost.
What does that imply? That the main investment is really in the plot of land and access to the community's infrastructure and lifestyle, and the actual house construction is a secondary, perhaps lower cost.
That could be one interpretation, yes. It might change the investment calculation a bit compared to buying a fully finished villa elsewhere.
Interesting. Any mention of how these communities plan to integrate with the existing local community? That's always a sensitive point with large developments.
Yes, they actually make a point of highlighting that over 60% of their workforce comes from local communities. They frame this explicitly as creating opportunities through employment, training, and inclusion. They even use the phrase real estate with purpose where prosperity is shared, positioning the project itself as a benefit to the local area.
Okay, so a very detailed picture of an intended lifestyle, strongly tied into the region's perceived potential. The sources also give some specific details about one particular project within this Zinoha series called ZA2.
That's right. ZA2 is mentioned as the next gated society they're launching. Located in the same general area of Sindhudurg, again described as being on that cusp of South Maharashtra and North Goa.
And they provide size and plot details for ZA2.
Yes, the specifics cited are over 20 acres in size, planned for 150-plus plots, and including over 100 dedicated staff quarters with basic amenities.
And distances to key points. That's always helpful context.
They do provide those. 9 to 21 minutes driving time from 5 different beaches, 3.4 kilometers from the State Highway MSH4, 16 kilometers from the nearest railway station, 21 kilometers from the local Sindhudurg Airport, and 55 kilometers from the big OPA International Airport over in Goa.
Okay, that puts its location pretty clearly on the map in relation to all that infrastructure we discussed earlier. Now, it's really important to remember, and the sources themselves state this upfront, these are plans and proposals. They're subject to change.
Absolutely. There's a standard but crucial disclaimer included in the material. It clarifies that the plan, the specifications, the images, they're all indicative proposals at this stage. The developer explicitly reserves the right to make changes, subject to getting approvals. It states clearly this document isn't a binding offer or any kind of legal commitment.
Right. Earnest impressions are just that, impressions. Costs, designs, facilities, all subject to change without notice.
Right.
We're just relaying the information presented in the source material here.
Exactly. Presenting what the documents contain, warts and all, including the disclaimers.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together then, we've got the economic shift, the infrastructure revolution, the market dynamics with those diverse buyers, the critical environmental regulations playing a huge role, and then these specific examples like Zinoha focusing on a particular kind of lifestyle. What's the overall takeaway from these sources about Sindhudurg's real estate transformation? What's the big picture?
Well, the picture that really emerges is one of a region that seems poised for significant, potentially even explosive growth, driven primarily by that dramatically improved connectivity and a lot of targeted investment, both public and private.
Right.
The market clearly offers strong potential, especially in those segments catering to second homes, lifestyle-focused properties, and tourism-linked development. And it seems to be backed, at least for now, by some pretty attractive rental yields.
But, and it's a big but, this transformation is happening within a very sensitive ecological context. Those strict environmental regulations aren't just, bureaucratic hurdles. They're essential guidelines for making sure the development is sustainable in the long run. Success really seems to hinge on balancing that growth with preservation.
Precisely. And achieving that sustainable prosperity, according to these sources, it requires really meticulous planning. Rigorous adherence to those environmental rules is paramount. Continued investment not just in the big headline infrastructure, but also in local utilities, water, power, sewage to support the new development, and a deep, nuanced understanding of the very distinct micro-markets within the district. It's not one size fits all.
It really does sound like it's all about finding that critical balance point between seizing the undeniable opportunity for growth and protecting the very natural beauty, the very environment. That makes the opportunity desirable in the first place.
Yeah, the sources strongly reinforce that idea, that the long-term health and prosperity of Sindhudurg's real estate market are just intrinsically linked to successfully balancing this new wave of development with preserving its unique ecological character. That balance is absolutely paramount for long-term success.
Which leads us nicely into a final thought for you, our listener, to consider. We've seen how development in Sindhudurg is being shaped by its sensitive natural environment and how it's attracting buyers interested in this idea of experiential or pure living. So in a place like this, where preserving that environment is so key to the long-term appeal, how might the very concept of luxury living itself need to redefine itself to be truly sustainable and genuinely desirable in the future? What does luxury even mean then in that context?
It really raises a fascinating question, doesn't it, about the future of development in these incredibly nature-rich but sensitive areas?
Something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Rising sun, Zinoha calling. Kiwi dreams by the ocean wide. Wellness blooms where peace resides. Community thrives with every soul. Together we make the rhythm whole. Untouched coastlines whisper your name. Zinoha calls. Hear the sound, a place where harmony is found.